Good morning. I'm able to be here with you all today. Thank you, Miss Therese, for leading us through that wonderful introduction and meditation. It was really grounding and rooting for me as well. And I actually want to invite us into more grounding and rooting and meditation because this is the Racial Awareness and Mindfulness Festival. So we're going to be doing lots of both today, and that's so wonderful. So, let's just take a moment to just wherever you are, whether you're sitting, standing, lying on the ground, curled up in your bed, just get comfortable where you are. And I like to just, if you want, you can soften your eye stance. You can also close your eyes. You can keep your eyes wide open. Do whatever feels right to your body. This is an opportunity to just listen to ourselves and to listen to the wisdom of our body and our inner spiritual authority. And so let's just take a few deep breaths. I personally like to take deep breaths that are 4 counts in, 4 counts out, just to help me go as deep as possible. So let's take a few of those this morning as we get started. And the beautiful thing about this is you just continue breathing, is you're in the privacy of your own home. And so you can inhale and then exhale any way that feels right to you. If you want to make all the noises, if you want to burp, if you want to shout it out, if you want to get up and dance in your pajamas, you can do whatever you want to do to just listen to your body as you exhale. And let's just continue breathing just for a few more moments. Connecting with our breath, reminding ourselves that the breath is constantly sustaining us, constantly working on our behalf, constantly doing the most to keep us alive, keep us energized and resourced. When we're sleeping, the breath still works for us. When we're distracted, the breath still works for us. Even when we aren't grateful for it, we aren't mindful of it, the breath is always doing everything it can, constantly serving us, connecting us to the resources in our air, sending oxygen throughout our bodies so that our muscles and our organs can do what they need to do. It is healing, it is present, it is constant. And as we just continue breathing this morning, let's just remind ourselves that the breath, like spirit, like source, is source without source. No matter what you call it, whether it's higher power, deeper power, God, Jesus Christ, ancestors, whatever that source is that is supplying you, nurturing you. And it's like the breath. It's always there with us, for us, whether we acknowledge it, whether we're grateful, whether we're aware, it's always there, available to us. Offering us everything we need, all the resources we need, all the love, all the power, all the wisdom, all the healing. Like the breath, it's always available to us. We simply need to swing wide the door of our hearts and receive it. And as we continue breathing, I'm going to lead us in a little reflection. So you can just breathe, settle, listen. And I'm going to share a reflection with you. I've had enough. I'm sick of seeing and touching both sides of things. Sick of being the damn bridge for everybody. Nobody can talk to anybody without me, right? I explain my mother to my father to my little sister to my brother to the white feminists to the black church folks to the ex-hippies to the black separatists to the artists to my friends' parents. Then I've got to explain myself to everybody. I do more translating than the goddamn UN. Forget it. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of filling in your gaps. Sick of being your insurance against the isolation of your self-imposed limitations. Sick of being the crazy at your holiday dinners. Sick of being the odd one at your Sunday brunches. Sick of being the sole black friend to 34 individual white people. Find another connection to the rest of the world. Find something else to make you legitimate. Find some other way to be political and hip. I will not be the bridge to your womanhood, your manhood, your humanness. I'm sick of reminding you not to close off too tight for too long. I'm sick of mediating with your worst self on behalf of your better selves. I'm sick of having to remind you to breathe before you suffocate your own full self. Forget it. Stretch or drown. Evolve or die. The bridge I must be is the bridge to my own power. I must translate my own fears, mediate my own weaknesses. I must be the bridge to nowhere but my true self. And then I will be useful. That was the bridge poem by Donna Kate Rushin, or as I like to call it, the Diary of a Mad Black Reconciler. And that poem was actually written 40 years ago by a Black lesbian poet and activist. And it is still relevant today. Forget it. I must be the bridge to my own self. When the event organizers asked me to come and talk about reconciliation and specifically the problem with reconciliation, as we understand it here in North America, I was thinking, well, if there's anybody who would know about that, that would be me. I spent a good chunk of my career as a Black woman here in the United States as a reconciler. That was my title. I was even the professor of reconciliation at Duke Divinity School. And I was just like the woman in the poem. I was so busy mediating all these relationships, translating. I did more translating than the goddamn UN. I was often that person who was mediating with people's worst selves on behalf of their better selves. I would often tell myself as I went into these different situations that were unsafe for me as a Black woman, that did not honor the image of God in me, did not honor my Black female divinity, did not even acknowledge my humanity. I'd go in there and think, you know what? Reconcilers are bridges, and bridges get stepped on. And that was kind of my way of bringing a bit of morality to the work that I was doing. Fast forward a few years, and I feel differently. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about why I feel differently this morning. So before we get started, I just want to start with some definitions because I am a social psychologist and definitions are so key. What exactly are we talking about when we say reconciliation? That is a great question. Well, reconciliation is actually a term that for many, many, many years was not even a spiritual term. Now it's often used, particularly in Christian contexts, but not exclusively. And actually, the origins of the word are in the ancient Greek, and it was a common word used in the Roman Empire, right around the time that Jesus of Nazareth was living. And the word actually in the original Greek is katalasso, and it means to change or exchange. And really what it was only used in the context of deeply political and social healing processes. So two warring nation states are trying to come together and form a truce. And so reconciliation, this term katalasso, would be used in that context as they're divvying up land, as they're figuring out what amends need to be made in order for there to be actual peace. So it was very political. It was very social. It always involved something that was of value, like land or money, or and it always had a very political context to it. Now, that was the way it was understood. This is like an all-inclusive, really a lot like reparations, right? Like we're on a political level trying to make things right. The first person who used the term in any sort of spiritual context that we now see in churches across North America was the Apostle Paul. Now, he appropriated the term, and in 2 Corinthians 5, and then also again in Ephesians 2, uses this Greek word, katalasso, to talk about how we are reconciled to God, therefore we should be reconciled to each other. So all of a sudden, it gets put into Christendom, this deeply political sort of reparations-oriented term. So prior to Paul using it, a lot of reconciliation scholars, such as Curtis DeYoung, said reconciliation could really be about exchanging places with the other, overcoming alienation through identification, solidarity, actually being in each other's shoes, taking on each other's pain, restoring relationships, positive change, totally new frameworks for ways of being, and a rich togetherness that is very political. That was the definition of reconciliation. Reconciliation in the original context should change everything. But when Paul appropriated the term and it got sucked up into Christendom, at the time, that was okay because Paul was, a Jew living under Roman occupation. And Christianity at the time was this like kind of outpost, cultish, random little thing with this weird Messiah named Jesus of Nazareth. And people weren't really taking it seriously. And so reconciliation was a term that was used and coined by people who did not have power, who were trying to address injustices. But as Christendom grew and it became aligned with power, now all of a sudden the people talking about reconciliation were the people who had power. And they were like, oh, we should make everything right. We should be together. We should have unity. We should do all these things. So a term that really sounds amazing at its core, of course, deeply political changes, deeply political solidarity, deeply political new frameworks, all inclusive, let's change everything, has turned into something different now. So let me give you an example of how it's different now and how the term reconciliation is often used. Back in 2014 or 2013, before when I was deep into my career as a reconciler, I was attending a church in Minneapolis that was a predominantly white church because I thought that was my goal. I needed to go in there and help them change and be the person who went in and started to do these unity processes. And so I was at this church, and this church decided to do a reconciliation event. It was in the wake of yet another slew of police shootings of unarmed Black people. And so this church, mostly full of white people, wanted to do something. So they said, here's what we're going to do. The pastor's going to start preaching about reconciliation leading and for a series. And we're going to talk about how important unity is. And then they said, let's put on an event. And let's try to put on an event that's going to bring Black folks and white folks together. And so this white church planned an entire event. I wasn't involved with it at all because I would have recommended, even back then, this is not going to work. But that said, I was part of this church. And so the pastor was preaching about reconciliation, certainly not in the way that the Roman Empire understood it, but the current way. And then they said, let's invite a bunch of Black churches. We're going to put on this event. We're going to get a Black choir to come sing. We're going to get a Black soul food restaurant to come provide the catering. And then we're going to invite all these other Black churches. And then we're going to come and have them at our church, on our turf, on our terms. And we're going to do unity. This is what it's going to look like. And so I bought a ticket to the event. And I showed up to the event because far be it from me to not look when there's like a total train wreck happening. So I showed up and I got there. And when I walked into the church, all the Black people were sitting on one side of the church and all the white people were sitting on the other side of the church as they were eating their food, listening to this Black gospel choir. And I just remember going over and talking to some of the Black people, and they were like, these white folks don't even want to talk to us. I think they just want us for our food and our music. And afterwards, I talked to the white pastor of this church, and he said, I thought this was going to do unity. I thought that this was going to be a way for us to come together, and it didn't really work. And he was all disappointed and disillusioned and ready to give up. And I just said, this wasn't real. This was not real. This was not solidarity. This was not overcoming alienation through identification. This was not restoring relationships and new frameworks that change everything. As reconciliation scholar Curtis DeYoung writes, reconciliation is often in this context understood as assimilation, appeasement, a passive peace, a unity without cost, and maintaining power with only cosmetic changes. This white church wanted all these Black folks in the midst of their mourning, their grief, their pain, to come onto the white church's terms, turf, power structure, and all become friends. In our context, in North American context, reconciliation is all about equality, and therein lies the problem. It doesn't address existing power differences. It doesn't exchange power, like the original definition, katalasso in the Greek, which is all about exchange. It's all about new frameworks. It's all about new structures. It's all about solidarity. We have become obsessed with equality here. Let's just create one table and everyone can be at the table together. There's bajillions of social psychology studies that show that when the goal is equality between two existing groups who have an existing power difference, when the goal is equality, we are never able to meet that goal. Lots of research between Israelis and Palestinians, for example, has shown that when Palestinians and Israelis come together to try to exist in a context of equal relationships, the equal relationship piece only works for a short amount of time before the groups eventually fall back into the pattern of the people with power taking charge and the people who have historically not have power just kind of supporting or acquiescing to the people with power. It doesn't actually work for us to come together and say, let's all be around the same table, because the people who are used to having power will then just dominate that table, even though it's all under the auspices of unity and equality. So what social psychologists have started to recommend and have started to see results in terms of research is that when the goal is equity, when the goal is actually flipping the power dynamic, more consistent with the original term katalasso, an actual exchange, when the people who had power no longer have power, and the people who didn't have power initially or historically step into a role that's empowered, that's when those groups come together, we can actually start to see something that looks like equality. which is fascinating to me because as someone who grew up in the Christian tradition, I have heard a story that Jesus of Nazareth told over and over and over again. And it is so consistent with this social psychology research, which makes me just think, I bet Jesus was a social psychologist because this story that Jesus of Nazareth tells, it's a parable, it's an allegory. It's not a real story, but it's something for us to look to as we start to think about what is a new way forward as we address power differences here amongst us. Jesus told this story in the book of Matthew, and he's basically, before he even tells a story, he says, if you want things to be right, in a world where people are whole, in a world where we actually are nurturing each other, in a world where we are addressing real wrongs, this is what it looks like. That's how he prefaces this whole story by saying, this is what you're looking for. If you're looking for more than just a passive peace, if you're looking for more than just unity without cost, if you're looking for more than just the existing people maintaining their power with only cosmetic changes, this is what it looks like. And he tells this story about a man who owns a vineyard. And he goes out to where all the day laborers are sitting, on the side of the road, looking for work. He needs help. He needs help managing this vineyard today. He needs to hire day laborers. So he goes at the beginning of the day, hires a bunch of people, says, hey, I'm going to give you this amount of money at the end of the day. This one, so let's say one coin, I'm going to give you one coin at the end of the day, hauls them all up in his wagon. They go off. Those people start working. Then a couple hours later, the owner's like, I could use a little more help. There's more work to be done. So then he goes back to where all the day laborers are hanging out, and he looks to see who's left. And he's like, all right, let me hire a few more of these people. He kind of looks over all the people, hires some people, and then brings them back to his vineyard and says, hey, I'm going to give you one coin. So just start working. It's like noon now. It's the day is half over, but he's like, you know what? I'm going to give you one coin. And then early afternoon, he's thinking, there's still more work to be done. Let me go back and hire some more people. So he goes back to this place on the street where the day laborers are hanging out. And there's still like a motley crew there, people who just never got picked. All of the owners came and picked their people. And these are the people who didn't get picked. It's like growing up in school and, wanting to get picked for the kickball team or something. These are the folks that nobody wanted. And the owner says, you know what? I need y'all. We have more work to do. So even though it's 3:00 in the afternoon, I'm going to haul you guys up. I'm going to hire you. Come out and just work an hour or two till the end of the day, and I'm going to give you a coin. I'm going to pay you for your work. So at the end of the day, he lines up everybody, the people who've been working a full day, people who've been working a half day, people who've only been working a couple hours, and he gives everybody a coin, what he promised them. They all got the same amount. So this is equality, right? He gives them all the same amount. And what's fascinating about this is the people who got picked first are livid. They are all up in arms. They're like, wait a second. I worked all day and you're only giving me a coin. Why are you giving these other people the same amount when they only work 2 hours? And as a social psychologist, this is why I think Jesus is a social psychologist, because as a social psychologist, I cannot look at this story without thinking, well, who would get picked at the beginning of the day? Who are the people who get picked first when it comes to employment? It's the people who are able-bodied. It's the people who are white in our society. It's the people who speak the language. It's the people who have their documentation, their papers. It's the people who are cisgendered. There's no confusion about how they present to the world in terms of gender. It's the people who are Christian in our society. Those are the people who get picked at the beginning of the day. So those are the people who have power. Those are the people who are privileged in our society. But who are the people who would get picked over? Who would get just ignored? You know what? Nah, I'm not really looking for you. I'm trying to hire people, but you don't really look like you can do much for me. It's the people who are under oppression in our society. It's the Black folks. It's the people who have a criminal record. It's the people who perhaps don't look the part because they are dealing with economic oppression and they don't have the money to look professional. It's the people who don't speak the language. It's the people who are disabled. It's the people who are Muslim and hijab. It's the people who are transgender or queer. And so what's fascinating is it's the privileged people who worked a whole day and were given exactly what they were promised, who are livid that these other folks, these marginalized folks, are getting treated the same way that they're being treated. And here is where Jesus makes one of his most important, I would say, theological and sociological statements. In order to experience the healing, the true unity, the true peace that we all are longing for in this world, the first will be last and the last will be first. Jesus isn't talking about equality here. Jesus is talking about equity. He's talking about switching the power dynamic, consistent with the research in social psychology. If you want to make things right, you cannot just bring people together around a table and say, kumbaya, let's all work together now. We have to actually repair the existing power dynamic. What does repair look like? What does reparations look like? It's a complete switch. The first will be last, and the last will be first. And so oftentimes when we talk about the reconciliation table, it's like a round table, kind of like the Knights of the, what's the Camelot, like Knights of the Round Table, where we all have an equal voice. We all have an equal leadership role at this table. But what I think Jesus is inviting us into to think in terms of our spiritual imaginations and our sociological imaginations is, no. That's how reconciliation has worked. But if we want true healing, if we want true katalasso, then what we need to do is actually envision not a round table, but an ovular table with a clear head and a clear foot of this table. We do not all have the same role to play. We do not all have the same amount of power. The people who've been at the head of the table need to take their seat at the foot, and the people who've been at the foot of the table need to take their seat at the head. Now, there's tons of, discussion. Even in my own career, I've spent a lot of time talking about how hard it is for people who've been at the head to take their seat at the foot and to embody that and to show up for that and see that as holy. That's why reconciliation has failed us, because the people who've had power have not been willing to give up power. But we rarely ever talk about the people who are used to being last, who are now being called to take their seat at the head of the table. We never talk about the people who have been their entire lives living under a white supremacist regime, a colonized society, taught that their voice doesn't matter, that they're not really holy, that it's right that they got picked last. These messages might not always be explicit, but they are implicitly communicated to us throughout our society. Blackness is lazy. Blackness is unholy. Blackness is not fit for leadership. Blackness is so far from the divine. I mean, Jesus is a white man, right? Can't you see from the pictures? that are everywhere in all sorts of churches, even in Black churches. So Blackness isn't divine. And even when I was doing this reconciliation work, such a good heart, so many good intentions, going into all these spaces where it was unsafe for me. I wasn't seen as divine. I wasn't seen as holy. I wasn't seen as someone who should be leading the process. Every once in a while, someone would say, you don't really have to put up with this. You don't have to put up with this abuse. You don't have to put up with this alienation. And in addition to saying, well, reconcilers are bridges and bridges get stepped on, I would also say, well, a lot of people say I'm Esther. And I was saying that, referring to the Jewish woman who in the Old Testament was essentially sex trafficked, stolen from her family, and brought to the king to join his harem without her choice, against her will. And in addition to being a sex slave to the king, also was asked to put her life on the line multiple times in order to save her people. And it's so interesting that I identified with her and saw that as noble. It's not surprising because all growing up, I was told, oh, it's good to be Esther. It's good to be her. She was the queen. But that's really a colonial interpretation of that story. And I had no idea. I was the person who was being called into taking my seat at the head of the table. And I was kind of like, no, I'm good here. I'm good here at the foot. That makes sense to my identity, makes sense with my theology. I'm good with that. And so later on today in my workshop, we're going to talk a lot more about structures and how power is social and what we need to do to flip the power dynamic in terms of social structures. But for this next few minutes this morning, I really want to talk about what about personal power? Because in order to experience what not only the social psychology research is telling us, but also what Jesus is inviting us into in this really beautiful story, in order for us to experience the wellness, the wholeness, the nurturing society that we all long for, the space in which all people are seen as holy and every single life, in fact, does matter, not just in phrase, a world in which Black trans lives really do matter, then those of us who've been socialized by society to be at the foot of the table need to embrace our personal power. All those years that I was doing reconciliation work, I never asked myself, but am I reconciled to myself? I'm so busy speaking at these conferences. I'm so busy taking on these academic positions. I'm so busy helping everybody connect with everybody. I'm so busy organizing these unity events. But am I reconciled to me? I can build a bridge to everyone else, but can I build a bridge to me? Because in order to take my seat at the head of the table, I actually have to know who I am. I have to know what I need. I have to know that I'm worthy of sitting at the head of that table. And the beautiful thing about this is that's what this whole day is all about, becoming reconciled to ourselves. Certainly becoming more racially aware, but also becoming mindful. How can we be present to us? How do I begin to heal? One of the things that I've encountered in my journey is that when I ask myself, what does it mean to be reconciled to myself? What does it mean to become a bridge to myself as a Black woman? There are so many social impediments to that. Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes has written a book and coined the term, the strong Black woman, where she talks about how Black women are ripe for being disconnected from ourselves because we have been socialized by society to take on an identity, this strong Black woman identity, where we are overly independent. It's really hard for us to ask for help or receive it. We tend to engage in caregiving relationships that are unhealthy. We're so busy caring for others. And we are not allowed to express emotion. We are disconnected from our emotions. If anything, we're maybe able to express a little bit of anger every now and then, but emotions like sorrow, emotions like joy, celebration, emotions like fear, those are not things that we are socialized to engage. And part of this comes from Black women in the racial uplift movement, which is a precursor to the civil rights movement. So, 20s, 1910s, 1920s, really feeling laden with the stereotypes that came out of our enslaved times. These stereotypes, these horrible stereotypes against Black women, the sapphire, who's just out there emasculating everybody, especially men, the Jezebel, who's just overly sexual and always trying to entice everyone, and the mammy, this sort of asexual, I'm not a person, I'm just here to serve you person. Those were all these stereotypes that we were languishing under. And so in the 1910s and the 1920s, Black women were like, you know what? We need to prove that we are not those things. So what do we need to do? We need to prove that we are useful. We need to prove that we can get the job done. We need to prove that we will go to any lengths to make things good for the people around us. And so Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes, in her book, Too Heavy a Yoke, Black Women and the Burden of Strength, details all of this and how we have been socialized to be this strong Black woman who just caregive, no emotion, no needs. Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes says that in pop culture, examples of this are Medea, Tyler Perry's Medea, and also Dr. Miranda Bailey on Grey's Anatomy. Those are just great examples of the strong Black woman. In our attempt to outrun the stereotypes of the Jezebel, the sapphire, and the mammy, we have run straight into another stereotype, which is the strong Black woman. And so as we're so busy not needing anything, caring for everybody else, being reconcilers to everybody else, just like the poem says, explaining everybody to everybody, mediating with people's worst selves on behalf of their better selves. As we've done all those things, disconnecting from our emotions, we have forgotten how to become bridges to ourselves. And this is a social systemic thing. This has nothing to do with our inabilities or inherent insufficiencies. This has everything to do with the way that society has pushed us into this box. And so a big part of becoming reconciled to ourselves is waking up to this and saying, okay, wait a second. I get to have needs. I get to say, oh, wait, I'm divine too. Oh, wait a second. You actually cannot just treat me like that. You cannot abuse me the way that they abused Esther and then try to act like that is holy and that you're doing me a favor. We need to be a little bit more like Nina Simone, who says, you know what? If they're not serving love at the table, you need to just get up and go. And it takes a while for us to start to connect with that because of this strong Black woman framework that has been impacting us. What does it mean to be reconciled to ourselves? How do I begin to heal from the wounds of white supremacy? How do I deepen my understanding of myself as divine? That's what this whole day is all about. Embodied movement, drumming, lament, connecting with our true history. We are building bridges to ourselves today at this conference. I know for me personally, deepening my understanding of myself as divine, building that bridge to myself, sent me on a journey all the way to France, where I walked over 400 miles to visit 18 different ancient Black Madonna statues in these remote mountain villages. And that's something that I detailed in this book that I just wrote called God is a Black Woman. But these journeys take us a long, long, long way from home. And it all starts in places like this, where we get to finally breathe and be mindful of the way that race has impacted us, even as we do justice work. Building a bridge to myself involves asking the questions and going down this path of how do I begin to connect to spirit in a way that connects me to abundance rather than fear. When I was doing all my reconciliation work, oftentimes I would be invited into spaces that I knew, I was being tokenized here, or I was afraid for my well-being, but I would think, well, if I don't go, who will? If I don't help, who will? If I don't say these truths, who will? If I don't stop them from the ongoing injustice that they're doing, who will? And that's really a way of living out of fear rather than abundance. I was afraid that if I didn't go, the work would not be done. And there's a whole nother way of connecting to abundance. But that's the work of building bridges to ourselves. That's the work of becoming reconciled to ourselves. And also a question, as we continue to reconcile with ourselves, how do we begin to dig deeper into the spiritual roots of our ancestors? Dr. Gay Byron, who's doing a keynote later on today, is going to really help us with this, particularly those of us who are rooted in Christianity. Where did Christianity begin? Is it really just the slave owner plantation religion, or are there deeper roots than that? And how do we start to connect with those roots? I cannot wait for her to share her scholarly and embodied Black girl magic wisdom around this. Because again, we're building bridges to ourselves. That's what this day is about. I'm so glad you're here with us. There's another reality. There's a different reality than the one that I shared first off this morning, of being pulled in every direction, of being exploited, of being a translator for everybody, of being so fed up, of being so exhausted because we're so disconnected from ourselves. And I want to close this time this morning by sharing this other reality, another poem by another amazing Black female poet. This one's Stella Dotsie, who's Afro-British. This is a poem called Roots. I am an ancient oak, twisted, gnarled, permanent, indifferent to the passage of time. I am amber and gold, russet and sage, bone white, blood red, moss green. I am rain blanched and sun bleached. And where I was once scorched by lightning, I am an angry charcoal black with keloid scars. Solid and thick girthed, my thighs resist the fury of the elements. yet remain vulnerable to the footfalls of passing strangers. They twist and turn, charting new paths into the rich, dark earth that nurtures me. They burrow deep, seeking life's sustenance and other treasures. My skin is rough and weather-beaten, rain-lashed, wind-smoothed, with many unexplored places, secret nooks colonized by teeming armies, whole cities that strive beneath a protective bark, hidden crannies where shy, itinerant seeds once took root and burst forth in a celebration of reckless beauty. Dark, barren places where I was once torn, limb from limb, and nothing more can grow. When I was a sapling, exploding with energy and purpose, I chose to make my home by the river, where her calm, impassive face could mirror my growth. Her music a soft, sighing lullaby, soothing me as I sleep. When the sun parches the earth, sapping my strength, she revives me with cool water from her own abundant store. Her gentle waves caressing my aching feet. Her gift is an orchestra with many players, drums and violins, a choir of joyful singers rousing me from my slumber as they herald the dawn of each new day. Time is my armory now. Scudding clouds keep their watch as the changing seasons present new horizons, healing wounds, renewing old paths. Tomorrow I shall be here still, wiser and sturdier than before. I have withstood the fury of thunder, the rage of forest fires. I know my life force will prevail. And if by chance an axe should fell me, should I succumb to the vengeance of the hurricane or the slow creeping stealth of nature's wrath, I shall sink gratefully into the earth that has sustained me, returning my gifts so that others may grow to touch the sky. Amen and Ashe.
Ashe, Ashe, Dr. Cleveland. We thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and not just some of the ways that you have interpreted some of the texts that we work with, but also personal stories that show how you embody these principles in your everyday life, and how you've shown growth and worked through some of these things. We all have some work to do, and we appreciate you giving us a little bit of extra push as we try to do that in our personal social spaces, in our communities, and in the larger country. So thank you so much for that. I was supposed to be preparing for my workshop, but this was too good, so I got all these notes. So everyone, we have about 10 more minutes. So you have a 10-minute break. You can grab some water, run to the restroom, whatever you need to do to prepare yourself. And in 10 minutes, we will start the first set of workshops. Okay. If you have any questions, send a chat to someone that you see as an organizer. It could be a private chat, or you can put it in the event chat or the stage chat. And we'll see you soon.